All right, so the quadratic formula that you're going to see here is another way to find the x-intercepts. So far we know how to find the x-intercepts by factoring and setting those factors equal to 0. We also know how to find the x-intercepts by taking the square root of both sides. And we also know how to find the x-intercepts by looking at a graph if they come out to be integers, or looking at your table. So this formula that we're going to be using, this b squared minus 4ac, you saw in your homework a few minutes ago. So that it actually has a name, and I want you to write this name down. So this part that's called b squared minus 4ac is called the discriminant. Okay, so please write that down. Okay, circle that part and write it as the discriminant. And if you notice, this part right here, the negative b, or opposite of b that I say, this right here, where have you seen this? What is that called? That's called the axis of symmetry. So when you put those two things together, you have the quadratic formula. Okay, now notice this says x equals all of this. So that means, again, you're finding the x-intercept. So when you put the discriminant along with your axis of symmetry, we have the quadratic formula. Okay, now, of course, we want our trinomial, or even if it's a binomial, still has to be in what we call standard form. So standard form means you have your squared term first, your x term next, and your constant last, okay, if you have all three terms. All right, so we're going to move on, and we're going to actually use that quadratic formula to solve this. And solve, again, means you're finding the x-intercepts. Okay, we're just going to be using a different method. So let's write down the quadratic formula first. X equals opposite of b, and I'm going to put over 2a. And then you have this plus and minus, okay, because you know how when we take the square root, we have the positive and negative of it. And then we have the discriminant piece under here, b squared minus 4ac. So what I'm going to ask that you do is do the discriminant first. So we're going to start off by just doing this piece under here first. All right. So we're going to say b squared minus 4ac, and we know this is our a term, this is our b term, and this is our c term. And sometimes it's even nice to actually identify, just say a equals 1, b equals -2, and c equals -8. Okay, because it just makes things a little bit easier. You don't have to keep looking up, okay, at the actual problem. So when I put in b, remember, always put your values in parentheses for your calculator. So you're going to put it in this way: -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -8. Okay, so go ahead and use your calculator and see what you get for that. All right, so we agreed that is 36. So we're going to say equals 36. So I already know when I'm doing this quadratic formula that I'm going to put 36 under the radical. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say x equals, and see how this says take the opposite side of b. I'm going to go over here. B is now -2. The opposite of that is what? +2. Plus or minus the square root of 36 divided by 2 times the a. Well, 2 times 1 is just 2. So I'm just going to say 2. I don't need to put the 1 there. So now I'm ready to write this as 2 equations. Because I have this plus and minus right here, I'm going to separate them. So I'm going to say x equals 2 plus, well, what is the square root of 36? Okay, 6. And then I'm going to also say x minus 6. 2 minus 6. That's how we separate the plus and the minus. And divide it by 2. So I just took this plus and minus that was here, and I put one as a plus and one as a minus. All right? So 2 plus 6 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is what? 4. So that's one of your x-intercepts. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. 2 minus 6 is -4. -4 divided by 2 is what? -2. And then you just simply write them in the little set brackets. Okay, doesn't matter which one you write first because, again, they're not coordinates, they're intercepts, solutions. So it's a very easy formula to use, okay, if you take it in little pieces and make sure you take care of that discriminant first. All right, let's do the next one. All right, so I'm going to say A equals to 3, B equals to 5, C equals -4, and that's how I want you to start your problem off with as well. What A is, what B is, what C is. Then I want you to go ahead and do your discriminant. B squared minus 4AC. Okay, put in those values and make sure you're using parentheses. 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times -4. Okay, so I'll wait for someone to give me the answer for that. Okay, all right, so we're going to go with 73. So that is called our discriminant. So now we're going to write down our quadratic formula. X equals opposite of B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC divided by 2A. So I'm ready to put in my number. So the opposite side of B is going to be -5 plus or minus the square root of 73 divided by 2 times the A term. So that's going to be 2 times 3 is what? 6. So now this time we're going to have a decimal. So I'm going to ask you to find out what the square root of 73 is. So we're going to write this as X equals -5 plus, and somebody tell me what the square root of 73 is. 0.5, we'll do 8.54. Okay, that's the square root of 73 divided by 6. And then when we write the other one, we're just going to say -5 minus 8.54 divided by 6. All right, so this is what I would like for you to do because you got to do this the right way. When you punch this in the calculator, you got to first just type in -5 plus 8.54 and hit enter. Then hit divide by 6 and tell me what you get. All right, so we're going to have 0.59. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to make sure you hit enter after that first line. -5 minus 8.54. Okay, hit enter. And then divide by 6. Okay. All right, so X equals -2.25. And then you just write those answers in your set notation. And see how with using the quadratic formula, you can get those exact numbers, whereas you could not read that off of a graph. Okay, so there's an advantage. And the good thing about the quadratic formula, it'll give it to you no matter what type of number it is. So it's actually, a pretty good formula to know. All right, so let's do the last two. So we have A equals 1, B equals 6, and C equals 9. We're going to start off by doing our discriminant first. So we're going to put 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. Okay, so this one, tell me what you get. Yes. All right, so we're going to get 0. And it's okay to get 0. 0, you can take the square root of 0. The square root of 0 is going to be 0 once we get to the quadratic formula. So now we're going to have x equals the opposite of b plus or minus our discriminant piece divided by 2a. So we already know that our discriminant is 0 divided by 2a. Our a term is 1, so that's just going to be divided by 2. Okay. So now we're ready to separate it into our two equations. So we're going to have x equals -6 plus 0 divided by 2, and x equals -6 minus 0 divided by 2. So what is -6 divided by 2? -3. And -6 divided by 2? -3. So you only need to write that once. You don't need to write -3 and -3 since it's the same number. You just write it once, which really means that this vertex is sitting on the x-axis because it's only touching it one time. Okay, that's what it would mean if you had a visual. Okay. So you could actually graph this and see that it's only going to touch the x-axis at one point. All right. And I want you to know this, anytime the discriminant comes out to be 0, that means you're only going to have one solution. So put one solution. Okay, so when that b squared minus 4ac equals to 0, that means you're only going to have one answer. Because when you add 0 and subtract 0, you really aren't changing the problem. All right. Now you're going to see what happens to the discriminant when there's no solution. That's going to be the last one. A equals 2, B equals -3, C equals to 5. So let's do our discriminant. So -3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. Okay, if someone can figure that out for me. All right, so negative what? Now, since the discriminant is negative, we don't have to go any further. And that's why I always have you to do the discriminant first. So since it came out negative, no solution. Okay, so when that discriminant comes out negative, because guess what, guys? You cannot take the square root of, you know how this is under the radical in your quadratic formula? You can't take the square root of a negative number. So that's why it's no solution. So you stop. You don't have to go through that entire process. So that's why we always start off with the b squared minus 4ac.